Let's have a look at the 10 organizational structures. And the most important part is that you have a good understanding what these structures are and basically how they are different from the organization you may be working in today. It's very important for the project manager to understand what the consequences are of the organizational structure to his or her freedom and power. These are the 10 organizational structures. We can divide them in the simple structures, the classic structures, and then we have the special organizational structures. So in the simple, we have the organic or simple structure. In the classic, we have the functional, the weak matrix, the balanced matrix, the strong matrix, and the project-oriented. And in special structures, we look at multi-divisional, we look at virtual structures, hybrid, and of course, our PMO is here again. First of all, the organic or simple structure is typically for small, young companies and startups. So it's very simple. People are, let's say, just working together. They didn't set up a formal structure yet, which makes it quite interesting. But at the beginning, it's okay. But later, when the company is growing, this cannot continue. There are flexible work groups. People are working together. They like to do the thing. They are motivated in doing these different things. And the people are not really dedicated to specific tasks. They make work groups when they need them. They work together and they're all in the same boat. So they're all doing the same things to save the company. We have people who jump in to finish activities and the project. So when you need it, people will come to the help, leave their other activities waiting for some time, but everybody is working together. The resources are independent, and the project manager is more like a project coordinator or an expediter when there is not a lot of authority over the people. And it's more on a voluntary basis that people work together, and that's also the power of these organizations because they want to finish something. The project sponsor is in most cases the owner of the company, and there is not so much administrative staff to support the project manager. Basically, nobody. In most cases, perhaps the secretary when the owner is really interested in the project. It all depends a little bit on the actual situation. There is little or no historical information. There may be an embryonic PMO, but basically there is nothing much. So all these things are still growing. These are young companies. They start to work on their projects, and basically it's here where they should start doing some things. They should start building their lessons learned database. They have to build their knowledge because they can start making a PMO on a project by project case. A more known structure is the functional structure, where we have functions. Everything is organized around functions, and everything is managed from a central perspective. The management is organized around the functions, and the functional managers are in power. The project managers have little power. They're typically coordinators or expediters, and they're not always, or most of the time, they're not having a full time project management assignment. They're typically defined within the functions because of the coordination problems, because of the communication structure. It's typically a project which is in the function, which also limits the company because we know that for projects we need more multidisciplinary knowledge. So in the function, it's like that, but yeah, it's not ideal, but because of the communication, that's the best way to do it. There is typically no or a very limited administrative staff, and it's difficult to coordinate over functions. You have to go from the functional manager, you have to go up the chain, then come down the chain. There are a lot of problems with communications. An improvement is the weak matrix. A weak matrix is an improvement. We have project teams which are composed of people of different functions, but the functional manager has still most of the power. So the project manager gets a little bit more power, but it's still the functional manager who has the real power, the decision making power. Team members combine the projects with functional or departmental um, duties, so they are in fact between those the project and the function. And it happens sometimes that your project manager disappears because he has to work for the functional manager, and then you're a little bit stuck because you don't have a project manager anymore. The project manager is typically a coordinator or team leader, uh, limited power, and typically a part time project staff. Like I said before, the power is here with the functional manager, and the functional manager typically also owns the budget. Not a very good place to be as a project manager, but better than the functional structure. After the weak matrix, we find the balanced matrix. In the balanced matrix, as the word says it, the power is balanced between the project manager and the functional manager. The power of the project manager is low to moderate, but it's already moving towards a higher power of the project manager. The project team is typically part time, and it's sharing between project and departmental duties. There may be a part time administrative staff, and the budget is shared by the project and the functional manager. They both have 50-50 power. There may be some power struggles between the two managers because it's clear that each of them wants to have the highest power. So the project manager and the functional manager may be struggling. So it's not easy for the project manager to work here. Typically, it's more a project coordinator, not a project manager, but there are still issues at hand. Having 50-50 power is not really a good thing to have because nobody can make the right decisions, and you always have to find compromises. And in PMI, a compromise is seen as a weak decision or as a lose condition. It becomes better with a strong matrix. Now the power is really on the side of the project manager. The functional manager is still there, but the main power, the main leadership is with the project manager. Its power is from moderate to high. You see that we're moving towards the high power of the project manager. There is a full-time team, or a part of the team may be full-time, so it's really evolving towards a full-time team that are all the time available for the project manager. The project manager also is working in a full-time scenario on the project. There will be an administrative staff allocated all the time, full time, to support the project manager. And the budget, this is also very important, is also entirely managed by the project manager. The ideal structure for projects is, of course, the projectized structure. This structure is really built to support projects. Everything is organized around the project. The project manager and the team members are allocated to this project. The The team members typically come out of a pool of people which are divided over the projects, but once they're allocated to a project, they are dedicated to that project. The power of the project manager goes from high to complete or absolute power. The project manager is really the person in charge of the project. The project manager and the team work autonomously on the project, only this project. They have all their team and they are managing this team. The project staff is full time and it's dedicated, and they are really under the authority of the project manager. It means that the project manager can decide who, what, and when, can reallocate resources between activities, can change everything. He or she is really in absolute power. And of course, it's clear to say that the budgets are managed by the project manager. Let's now look at some special structures. The first one is a multi-divisional structure. It's like a functional structure, but now we replicate roles in different divisions. You can have large companies, for example, Nestle, they have different divisions, Johnson and Johnson, even AT&T or other companies, they have different divisions, and you have those roles which are replicated in those specific divisions. Uh, like I said, typically very large organizations, they have to split up in divisions. Otherwise, it's impossible to manage the entire entity. Um, Typically, they may have project managers with little authority. They may be called coordinators or expediters. So, when you are, of course, in a multi-divisional structure, you may also have parts which are, in fact, really dedicated to project management. But then we will talk more about a hybrid structure that we will see at the end. So, there are, of course, a lot of combinations. Huh? There is also typically in the multidivisional structure part-time allocation of resources, and there may be a part-time administration staff, but it's not necessarily. Typically, the functional manager are in charge of the budgets. The recent evaluations in technology and location of people, we always also start with virtual organizations or a virtual structure. They're a network type of organization, and the divisions have representatives dedicated to the project, which are typically part-time allocated to the project. There are a lot of challenges to communicate and to manage because the organization may be in different places, very unclear structure, relationships, and so on. There is a low authority over the resources. The authority and the budgets are typically shared with functional managers, and you can have both part or full time project managers. There is also the possibility to have a part or full time administrative staff to manage the project. The hybrid structure is also called a composite structure. It's a combination of different structures into one major structure, depending on the needs itself. It can be used for special projects, and the naming and the power of the project manager depend on the situation of that specific organization. So it's typically depending on the situation. There is also the project management office structure, a very important element that we find in or should find in a lot of organizations that are dealing with projects. It's a dedicated organization for projects that is set up to deal with projects within an organization. They define a uniform approach to deal with uh, the project. So how do they organize everything? What are the standards? The PMO is in fact driving the project management environment. The influence of the PMO depends on the maturity model. We've seen already before that there are different maturity states of the PMO. Now, how you get a PMO? The best approach is to start building the PMO while you are, let's say, starting with your projects that you are doing your first project. You start getting the information, you start storing them, you start sharing them, and basically you start building a PMO, and the PMO is growing with the maturity of your company. It's always possible to start immediately with a PMO, but I think that approach may be a little bit more difficult to realize because it's a bigger shock. Let the organization grow, let the PMO grow, and it will be, I think, a better solution. Um, PMOs define the trainings. They look at what trainings you have to have. They look at the coaching, communication, and they are there to help the project manager to resolve different issues. A supporting PMO, or typically a PMO, will be supporting the project manager with all kinds of things like change control, stakeholder management. They may provide administrative support to make the reports, distribute the reports. So, but it also depends on the maturity level of the PMO. A good thing is to have a PMO when your organization is really dealing with projects. It will make your organization stronger, and your project managers will have real support to resolve issues and to be more successful. Another presentation finished. We are getting towards the end of this section. So let's see what goes on. Let's have a look at the next presentation. You're doing a great job. I thank you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next presentation.